Welcome back to the Truth Factory. Qatar has 24 hours to respond to Saudi Arabia's demands before shit gets real. So let's talk about the Qatar conflict one more time, because I clearly didn't piss off enough Saudis with my last video. I was even accused of working for the Qatari government or being part of the US counterintelligence program. I really wish my life was that interesting, but I'm sorry, Saudi Arabia. You're probably not going to like this video either. Because as we know from WikiLeaks, both Saudi Arabia and Qatar were funding ISIS. But don't feel singled out. The USA has done it too, and probably a lot of other countries. But why would Saudi Arabia be virtue signaling the wealthiest country in the world? Well, I think on the surface that answer's pretty easy. It's money. But let me read you the basics in the Terrorism for Dummies handbook. Step 1. Orchestrate government-funded terrorist attacks. Step 2. Pretend like they had to do with religion and not politics. Step 3. Blame it on an oil-rich country and go in and take their oil. Step 4. Profit.
Show me the money.
Because you know whoever controls the oil controls the world. Does this seem a little familiar to anyone?
9/11 was an inside job.
Bush did 9/11, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. Anyway, it obviously goes much deeper than just this, but to get there, let's look at some of the demands that Saudi is making on Qatar. There are 13 of them, but I just want to talk about the ones that I think are most important. Number 1. Shut down the government-owned news source Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera reports on Middle Eastern affairs, and it has a huge viewer base and influence on the Middle East. Rulers in places like Saudi Arabia and Egypt resent the station's broad reach and its willingness to rile up opposition. They don't like outside opinions that might sway their normal Islamic propaganda. And they're angry that their populations are exposed to Qatar's reporting that is critical of their regimes. Basically, they're just trying to cut off Qatari's influence in the Middle East so they can push their own narratives on their people without any opposing opinions.
Just like your opinion, man.
2. Drastically scale back cooperation with Iran. I talked about Qatar's involvement with Iran in the last video. Saudi Arabia and Iran historically hate each other, and they have a proxy war in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia has already sunk over $180 billion into that war, and with the drop in oil price, there's talk that Saudi Arabia is now broke. And since the 60s, both Iran and Saudi Arabia have been fighting for Middle Eastern influence. They have opposing Muslim religions, and in my opinion, it's just a giant dick size contest on a grand scale.
These past 2 years have been hell because I think my dick is small.
And it's obvious why Saudi Arabia wouldn't want Qatar, a wealthy nation that probably has a nuke, to be allies with their enemy. 3. Remove Turkish troops from Qatar soil. Turkey is also an ally of Qatar, and I don't want to totally be biased against Saudi Arabia because obviously Saudi Arabia feels threatened that Qatar has huge powers backing them right now, and I could understand why Saudi Arabia is trying to protect its country, because if Turkey and Iran wanted to go after Saudi Arabia, right now would be the time to do it, as many sources believe they are going bankrupt, so tensions are extremely high. 4. End contact with groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood and submit monthly external compliance checks. What this really has to do with is Hamas. This is the most interesting part to me. Hamas runs the Gaza Strip, and they are the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, who were democratically elected by the Palestinian people. They're the remaining Palestinian resistance in Israel, and I'm sure most of you kind of understand the Israel-Palestinian conflict and how deep that goes. And this demand would help Israel as it would isolate and crush the Palestinian resistance. And I'll comment on that in a bit. Now, before people start accusing me of taking sides, I'm not.
Don't ever take sides with anyone.
And if it was really about pressuring the country to stop terrorism, that would be fine. But as I've explained, it clearly isn't. This is much bigger than that, and I don't think we need to start World War III over this. And that could very likely happen, because there are a lot of countries involved in this. But if this did go into World War III, here's my predictions of how the countries would divide. On one side, you'd have Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Emirates, Egypt, Yemen, Libya, Israel. And we know that Trump is also with Saudi Arabia. So if the USA goes into it, they most likely bring Canada, probably most of Europe, maybe Australia. And then on the other side, you have Qatar, Iran, Turkey, and Syria, which would not win them the war alone, but there are a couple of wild cards. Russia hasn't chosen a side yet, and China. China happens to have a military agreement with Iran. Now this kind of makes you wonder. Obviously Hillary Clinton's Zionist super PAC donors had huge Israeli ties and they wanted her to win. In fact, they invested millions and millions of dollars into her election. And back then she was talking about going to war with Russia. And now maybe you could see why Israel would want that. News channels are still told to push the Russian narrative, and maybe it's more insidious than just trying to slander Trump. It might be trying to set the American people up with a thought that Russia is evil,
of operations for Soviet intelligence.
And they may be more on board with a war against them. I've been watching Trump for a while, and I think I'm starting to understand how he works. I'm typically a fan of Trump, but not on this issue. In my opinion, Trump knows what's going to happen, and he is very much involved. And I also think that his travel ban has to do with this. I mean, it is blamed on recent terrorist attacks that have happened, but it also happened shortly after he got back from Saudi Arabia, and maybe that's all it is. I personally do agree with halting Muslim immigration right now, but so do the citizens in Europe, except for, the lawmakers there. But if I was in charge and I was going into a war in the Middle East, I would not want my country full of people from there. Historically, during wars, it doesn't go well for immigrants. An example would be the Japanese internment camps in Canada during World War II. And then you have countries like Sweden, Germany, Canada, who have had these open borders policies for Muslim immigrants for years now, and some of these countries are even starting to sympathize with Muslim terrorists. I'm not even kidding. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said terrorists should get to keep their Canadian citizenship. I'm willing to take on anyone who disagrees. I understand that not all Muslims are bad narrative, but all terrorists are inherently evil and they intend to kill people. But this is the same Prime Minister who has said, if you kill your enemy, they win. Said no one who has ever won a war, ever. I think this whole thing is a huge mistake on both sides and it will not end well. I really do think if Qatar doesn't give in to these demands, everyone involved is ready and willing to start World War III, and I think that's pretty scary. Thank you and have a great night.